New York didn't just open its arms to me. It opened my eyes to a whole new version of myself. I thought I was going for a visit, but I found a whole new life. Hello, my name is Haley. I want to tell you something personal. It's about my first time in New York City, the city that changed me forever. My name is Haley, and if you're anything like me, you've had moments where you stood in front of something big, something unknown, and wondered if you were crazy for even thinking you could do it. That was me the night before I left for New York City. I was in my tiny, rented apartment in Madison, Wisconsin, with a suitcase lying open on the floor. The window was cracked open, and I could hear the wind rattling against the screen, like the world itself was whispering, "Are you sure you're ready?" And the truth is, I wasn't. But I was going anyway. It's strange how a suitcase can feel like a confession. I wasn't just putting in clothes. I was packing pieces of myself. My favorite sweater from college that made me feel like home. The cheap but reliable notebook I used to scribble my thoughts. My late dad's dog tags that I'd worn every time I needed courage. It wasn't just luggage. It was my armor. Every item I packed felt like a chapter of my life I couldn't let go of, and every item I left behind made me feel like I was betraying some part of myself. I kept opening and closing the suitcase. I'd put something in, then take it out. My cat, Luna, sat nearby watching me, flicking her tail like she was silently judging my indecision. There were moments I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, wondering if this whole idea was just a fantasy. Who did I think I was? A girl from a Midwestern town, barely able to afford rent, trying to find her way in a city like New York? The idea felt massive, too massive. But so did the weight of staying where I was. You see, I had reached that place in life where I felt stuck. Not the kind of stuck that happens because you're lazy, but the kind where every day feels like a copy of the last. I'd wake up, make instant coffee, sit at my desk working a remote customer service job, and scroll Instagram during lunch watching other people live lives that looked so much more exciting than mine. There were pictures of rooftop brunches in Brooklyn, subway musicians pouring their hearts out, girls walking down Fifth Avenue in boots that clicked like they owned the world. And there I was in my flannel pajamas, eating leftover pizza for breakfast and pretending I didn't feel empty. New York wasn't just a place I wanted to visit. It was the dream, the symbol. It represented a different version of me, a bolder one. The kind of woman who doesn't hesitate to speak up, who wears red lipstick on a Tuesday just because, who walks fast and talks faster, who isn't afraid to fail in public. I wanted to meet her. I wanted to be her. And I knew I couldn't do that if I stayed where I was. But the truth is, packing up your life isn't as glamorous as the movies make it seem. There's no dramatic music or golden lighting. There's just your breath, a clock ticking, and that ache in your stomach. That feels a lot like homesickness for a place you haven't even been yet. I called my mom that night just to hear her voice. She was quiet at first. She didn't say she was worried, but I could hear it in the way she asked me twice if I had enough socks. Moms always find a way to ask the hard questions through soft words. I promised her I'd be careful, that I'd call every night, that I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. I don't know if she believed me, but she said, "I'm proud of you, Hales." And that was enough. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there with my eyes open, the streetlight casting golden bars across my walls, imagining what tomorrow would look like. Would I make friends? Would I get lost? Would I cry in the middle of the street? Probably yes to all of it. But even in my fear, I felt something else, an undercurrent of energy I hadn't felt in years. like my heart was already a few steps ahead of me, pulling me toward something I couldn't yet name. When morning came, I put on my favorite denim jacket, the one with the tear in the left cuff, and rolled my suitcase out to the waiting Uber. It was still dark, just before sunrise. The air was cold but clear. My neighbor, Mrs. Kennedy, peeked out from her porch and waved at me. I waved back, smiled, and whispered goodbye, not just to her, but to everything familiar. My street, my old coffee shop, the tiny corner of the world that had held me until now. The drive to the airport was quiet. I stared out the window, watching the flat fields of Wisconsin give way to highways and signs. And the early signs of morning, I didn't talk much to the driver, just answered politely and kept to myself. When we pulled up to the terminal, he helped me with my bag and said, "Big city, huh?" I smiled nervously and nodded. "Well," he said, "don't let it swallow you up. You show it who you are." That line stayed with me longer than I expected. You show it who you are. At the airport, everything felt surreal. I had flown before, but this felt different. This wasn't a vacation. This wasn't temporary. This was me stepping into a new chapter without knowing how the story ends. While I waited at the gate, I journaled a few lines. Today, I said goodbye to the girl who waits for permission. Today, I go where the loud hearts live. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I liked how it sounded. I liked that I had written it. The flight was uneventful, but my thoughts weren't. I replayed everything, my decision, my fears, the what-ifs. But when the plane started its descent and I looked out the window, I caught my first real glimpse of New York. The city stretched out below me like a living map, gray, gold, and endless. I saw bridges like veins, buildings that looked like stacked dreams, and rivers that reflected the morning light like glass. I pressed my forehead to the window and whispered, "I'm really doing this." We landed at JFK just after 10 a.m. The airport was buzzing, people rushing, announcements echoing, kids crying, wheels dragging. I stood there in the middle of it, clutching my suitcase like it was a lifeline. I wanted to cry, but not out of sadness. Out of awe, out of overwhelm, out of the simple fact that I was really here. I found the baggage claim, grabbed my second suitcase, and followed the signs to the taxi stand. The moment I stepped outside, the air hit me. It wasn't fresh, it smelled like hot concrete. Exhaust, bagels, and possibility. A wave of city sounds washed over me. Car horns, yelling, laughter, and footsteps. So many footsteps. I took a deep breath and stood still for a moment, letting the city settle into my skin. I got into a yellow cab, gave the driver the address of the small Airbnb in Manhattan I had booked, and leaned back. As we pulled away from the airport, I watched the world outside blur into motion. Street vendors, murals, bridges, and billboards all passed by in a flash. I was no longer the girl packing her suitcase. I was the girl arriving in a city that didn't know my name, and I couldn't wait to introduce myself. The cab driver played soft jazz on the radio. I watched the skyline begin to rise in the distance. It was exactly like the pictures, and nothing like them. It was more alive, more real. It pulsed with history, struggle, beauty, and grit. As we drove deeper into the city, my heart started to pound, not with fear, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. Like some part of me had always belonged here. When we turned the corner and my street came into view, I saw the brownstone building I'd be staying in. It looked old, beautiful, and full of stories. I thanked the driver, paid him, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The wheels of my suitcase bumped against the uneven concrete as I made my way to the front door. I stopped, looked around, and smiled. I had made it. I took one last breath before I turned the key. This was it. A new beginning. A new city. A new version of me waiting to be written. The door clicked open with a stubborn creak. I stepped inside my Airbnb apartment, a narrow, two-story walk-up in the Lower East Side with exposed brick, worn wood floors, and the faint scent of cinnamon mixed with old books. My host, Elena, had left a handwritten note on the tiny kitchen table. "Welcome to New York. Haley, make it yours." Next to it sat a mini bag of everything bagels and a bottle of orange juice in the fridge. That simple gesture made me feel like I wasn't completely alone in the biggest city I'd ever set foot in. I stood in the middle of the tiny studio space, clutching the handle of my suitcase, unsure of what to do first. Everything felt loud, even the silence. I dropped my bag, sat on the bed, and stared out the window. I could hear car horns in the distance, footsteps on the sidewalk, and the faint rhythm of a saxophone playing somewhere far below. I wasn't in Wisconsin anymore. I was in New York City. The real New York City? Not the one you scroll past on social media. Not the one from Netflix dramas or late-night talk shows. The actual living, breathing city with all its grit and glory. It didn't feel real until I peeled off my jacket and opened the window. A blast of city air hit my face, raw, cool, full of movement. I could smell hot pretzels from the corner stand below. I leaned out just enough to see the sidewalks bustling with people, all moving like they were late for something. No one looked up. No one noticed me, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. I didn't have to impress anyone. I just had to exist. After freshening up, I grabbed my crossbody bag, checked my phone's battery, and stepped outside. And that's when it happened. That first step. I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me, heard the lock click, and turned to face the street. That exact moment, my foot hitting the pavement, the weight of the door closing, and the rush of life unfolding before me, it felt exactly like a scene from a movie. The sun had broken through the clouds, and rays of golden light spilled across the avenue. A yellow cab sped past, music blaring from its windows. A man on a city bike weaved between traffic like he'd done it 1,000 times. A group of teenagers laughed loudly as they walked by with bubble teas in hand. Everything was alive. Everything moved fast, but I stood still for just a second longer, soaking it in. I whispered under my breath, "You're really here, Haley." Not to remind myself, but to believe it. I didn't have a plan that day. I just knew I had to walk. I needed to feel the city under my sneakers, hear it in my ears, breathe it in with my whole chest. I started toward the corner and followed the crowd without checking. Google Maps. It was terrifying and freeing all at once. The streets were loud, but not in a bad way. They were musical, layered. You had delivery trucks backing into alleys, people yelling from windows, dogs barking, sirens in the distance, someone playing drums on plastic buckets outside a bodega. And in the middle of all that, I felt like I was walking through a rhythm. I didn't fully understand yet, but I wanted to learn it. As I turned onto Delancey Street, I passed a woman in a business suit yelling into her phone, a guy selling knockoff designer bags on a fold-out table, and a mom balancing a toddler on one hip while pushing a stroller with the other. No one looked at me. No one cared. And for someone who had spent most of her life overthinking how others saw her, that anonymity felt like a gift. In New York, you could be anyone. A writer, a waitress, a tourist, a dreamer. No one would question it. You just were. About 15 minutes into my walk, I reached a small park tucked between buildings, Sarah D. Roosevelt Park. I later learned. I sat on a bench, sipping an iced coffee I grabbed from a cart vendor for $3. It was strong, bitter, and perfect. Around me, people read books, played chess, did yoga, walked their dogs. There was a little girl feeding pigeons, like she was starring in her own childhood movie scene. I took out my journal and wrote, "This place doesn't slow down for anyone. But if you learn to match its pace, it gives you everything." After resting, I wandered into a bookstore on Prince Street, tiny, cozy, filled with the scent of old paper and the soft rustle of pages turning. I ran my fingers over the spines, pausing when I found a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. One line jumped out at me. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I bought the book. I didn't think twice. That line felt like New York itself had whispered it into my ear. As the day went on, I kept walking. I crossed into Soho, then up into the West Village. Every block was like flipping a page in a storybook. Different styles, different faces, different vibes. I saw brownstones with flower boxes in the windows, graffiti-covered walls with art that made you stop and stare, subway grates steaming like something out of a noir film. I took it all in. I didn't care that my feet were aching or that my phone was at 12%. I was living it. I was in it. One moment that I'll never forget happened around 3 p.m. I stopped outside a music store where an older man was playing an upright piano that had been dragged onto the sidewalk. He wore suspenders, a faded baseball cap, and played with a passion that made people pause. I sat cross-legged on the curb and just listened. I didn't record it. I didn't post it. I just listened. He looked at me once, nodded, and kept playing. I smiled back. No words were needed. That's the thing about this city. Some of the most human moments happen in total silence. After that, I wandered into Washington Square Park. The arch rose before me like something out of a dream, and I stood there, letting its shadow fall across my face. The fountain was on. Kids were splashing in it. A group of NYU students were filming something on their phones. A man with a snake around his neck offered to let tourists take photos for tips. I watched everything, feeling like both an outsider and a part of the scene at once. I finally sat on the steps near the fountain, took off my shoes to let my tired feet breathe, and leaned back. The sky was streaked with early evening light. I pulled out my journal again and wrote, "Today, I took my first step into this world. I didn't plan anything. I didn't know where I was going, and it still felt like the beginning of everything." And that's when it hit me. This city didn't care who I had been before. It only cared about who I was becoming. Back in Madison, people knew me as quiet, hesitant, too careful. But here, no one had a script for me. I could rewrite it. And with every step I took, I was already doing just that. I wandered a bit longer, weaving through the edge of Chelsea, and eventually making my way toward the High Line. The sun was setting now, casting gold and pink across the skyline. I found an open bench and sat down, watching the traffic below and the river beyond. I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I wasn't on vacation. I had arrived. I belonged. A young couple sat next to me and asked where I was from. "Wisconsin," I said. They smiled. "You picked a wild place to land," the girl said. I nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here." When I finally made my way back to the apartment, the city had turned a different kind of beautiful. Neon lights glowed from every storefront. Steam rose from subway vents like ghosts telling old stories. The sidewalks were just as full, but the energy had changed. It felt electric, dangerous in a thrilling way. I bought a slice of pepperoni, pizza from a corner place for $1.75 and ate it while walking, just like I'd seen people do in movies my whole life. It was greasy, cheesy, and perfect. By the time I unlocked the front door and dropped my bag on the floor, I was exhausted. My feet were sore. My back ached. But my heart was on fire. I curled up on the tiny couch, opened my notebook, and wrote until my eyes started to close. I wrote about the street drummer, the man with the piano, the smell of bagels and diesel and blooming city trees. I wrote about the courage it took to take that first step, to trust that the street would meet my foot even when I didn't know where I was going. And as I closed my journal and turned off the light, I whispered one last thought to myself. If every day here feels like a movie, then I want to keep walking until I write the ending. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a train in the best possible way. My body ached from all the walking. My feet throbbed in places I didn't know could hurt. And my neck was sore from falling asleep on the couch instead of the bed. But my mind was alive. It was humming with color, music, people, and moments I had never known before. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling, letting it all sink in. New York had shown me so many faces in just one day. It didn't whisper, it roared. And yet I was still here, still standing, still breathing. That felt like a win. I got up slowly, showered, pulled my hair into a bun, and slipped into my worn Levi's and a gray hoodie that smelled faintly like home. I wasn't trying to be stylish today. I needed to be comfortable. I laced up my sneakers, slung my canvas tote bag over my shoulder, and grabbed a granola bar for the road. Today wasn't about exploring like a tourist. Today, I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to feel what it was like to live here, to blend in, move through the day like I belonged. I checked the subway map on my phone and decided to head toward Brooklyn. I'd heard the views from the Brooklyn Bridge were incredible, and I was craving some kind of quiet after the intensity of my first day. I figured I'd take the train to Dumbo, walk around, maybe grab coffee at one of those tucked-away spots I'd read about online. I didn't know exactly what I'd find, but that was part of the adventure. I walked to the nearest subway station and swiped my Metro card like I'd done it 100 times, secretly, proud of how natural it felt. The station smelled like metal, old rain, and something vaguely fried. The kind of scent that said, "You're in the belly of the beast now." I waited for the F train, watching rats dart along the tracks and people stare into their phones like the world above didn't exist. When the train screeched to a stop, I stepped in, grabbed the pole, and tried to act casual like I belonged. The ride was fine until it wasn't. Somewhere around J Street Metro Tech, the train slowed down, and an announcement crackled through the speaker in a voice I couldn't understand. Something about delays, rerouting, next stop Manhattan bound, and a bunch of other words that didn't quite register. I stayed on, assuming it would still stop near my destination. Rookie mistake. A few minutes later, I found myself in a completely unfamiliar Station 1, not even listed in the app's quick guide. When I got off the train, everything looked different. The signs were confusing. The exits led to nowhere I recognized. And worst of all, my phone was at 8%. Of course, I'd forgotten my charger. I figured I'd just pop up to street level and figure it out. But when I climbed the stairs and stepped into the sunlight, my stomach dropped. I was lost. Not cute lost. Not, oh, this is a fun adventure lost. I was real lost. There were no familiar landmarks, no tourist maps on the sidewalk, no helpful street vendors, just rows of buildings, cracked sidewalks, faded awnings, and a few scattered people who didn't exactly look ready to offer directions. I looked at the street sign, somewhere in deep Brooklyn. Definitely not Dumbo, not even close. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was okay. I wasn't in danger. I just didn't know where I was. I could fix this. Except the app froze. My phone went black. Battery dead. Panic surged. My throat tightened. I could feel my pulse in my ears. For a moment, I wanted to sit down right there on the sidewalk and cry. I thought about calling my mom, but of course, I couldn't. I didn't even know how to get back to the subway station, let alone to Manhattan. I stood there like a statue, trying not to look afraid. But I was, deeply. Every fear I'd tried to ignore came rushing back. You're not cut out for this. You're too soft. You're not brave. You'll end up back home, broken. Those voices were loud. But then something shifted. A woman stepped out of a laundromat nearby. She was probably in her 60s, wearing a Navy Yankees cap, oversized sunglasses, and a windbreaker that looked like it had survived 3 decades of New York winters. She noticed me standing there, wide-eyed and obviously out of place. And in a voice that was half sarcastic, half kind, she asked, "You lost, sweetheart?" I nodded, trying not to sound too desperate. Yeah, I was trying to get to Dumbo. My phone died. She squinted at me like she was trying to decide if I was clueless or just unlucky. Well, you're not going to get there standing like a deer in headlights. Come on, I'll walk you to the right train. Before I could even thank her, she started walking, and I followed. Her name was Gloria, and she'd lived in Brooklyn her whole life. She walked fast, talked faster, and knew the city like it was her own personal storybook. As we navigated the streets, she told me about the changes in the neighborhood, the rent hikes, the good bagel spots, and how she once saw Jay-Z filming a music video 2 blocks from where we stood. You kids come here thinking it's all Central Park and fashion shows, she said. But New York's got layers. You gotta know how to read 'em. I smiled, grateful and slightly embarrassed. I'm trying. She looked at me, slowed down just a bit, and said something I'll never forget. Trying's good. Trying means you're not standing still. That's how this city gets you. It only respects people who keep moving. When we reached the correct subway entrance, she pointed down the stairs and told me which train to take and where to switch. I wanted to hug her. Instead, I thanked her 100 times, and she waved it off like it was nothing. Just don't get off in Queens by mistake, she called out with a wink, unless you want to really get lost. I laughed, the tension finally breaking. As I rode the train toward the right stop, I stared out the window at the blur of graffiti, rooftops and brick buildings. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving the city, I was learning how to live in it. I was learning that it's okay to get lost, that sometimes that's the only way you actually find your place. When I finally stepped onto the Brooklyn Bridge, my heart was lighter. The skyline spread out behind me like a painting. I took it in, the Freedom Tower rising like a promise, the Statue of Liberty just visible in the haze, the traffic below rumbling like a heartbeat. I walked slowly, letting the wind whip through my hair, letting the moment settle into my bones. I wasn't the same girl who'd left her apartment that morning. I was stronger, smarter, calmer. I had gotten lost and found my way, not just through the streets, but through the doubt. Later, I sat at a little bench in Dumbo, sipping coffee from a local roaster and watching kids play near the water. My phone was still dead and I didn't care. I wasn't rushing to post or scroll. I was here, in the moment. In my story, I opened my notebook and wrote a new entry. Getting lost isn't failure. It's the beginning of finding out what you're really made of. That night, as I walked back to the train and watched the lights of the city flicker to life around me, I didn't feel like a stranger anymore. I felt like someone who had earned a little space here. Someone who didn't just visit New York, but survived it, one lost step at a time. I don't know if it was the coffee I had before bed or the rush of walking across the Brooklyn Bridge and finding my way through chaos, but I barely slept that night. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't quit. I kept thinking about everything, how I got lost, how Gloria helped me, how I didn't completely fall apart. The city hadn't defeated me. I was still here. But the truth is, beneath all that pride, there was something else keeping me awake. Fear. It wasn't the kind of fear you feel when you're in danger. It was quieter, sneakier. It whispered things in the back of my mind. When the city lights went out, "You're not good enough. You're pretending. You don't belong here. Someone will find out." I had this voice inside me that kept repeating the same toxic song I'd heard for years, that I wasn't bold enough, strong enough, fast enough to make something of myself. That voice had followed me from Wisconsin. It packed itself neatly in my suitcase between my jeans and my journal, waiting for the right moment to come out. And that morning it did. I got up early and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale and puffy from the bad sleep. My eyes were tired, and my confidence had slipped. Somewhere between the Brooklyn sidewalks and the subway stairs, I didn't want to go out. I wanted to curl up on the tiny couch, eat cereal from a paper bowl, and watch reruns of something dumb just to escape my thoughts. But I didn't come here to hide. I came here to change, and change only happens when you push through discomfort. I kept repeating that in my head like a chant, like a battle cry. After a long hot shower and way too much internal pep talk, I threw on my favorite leather jacket, a black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and my Converse sneakers. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I could still feel like myself. Even when I didn't feel strong, I pulled my hair into a tight ponytail and grabbed my journal, headphones, and a bottle of water. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but something about Times Square had been pulling at me. It was loud, bright, crowded. Basically everything that overwhelmed me, which is why I knew I had to face it. I took the train to 42nd Street. Gripping the pole with one hand and my nerves with the other. The train was packed, commuters in suits, tourists with backpacks, teenagers with earbuds, all ignoring each other in that perfect New York way. I tried to look casual, like I belonged there, but inside I was spiraling. What if I had a panic attack? What if I embarrassed myself? What if I cried in public and couldn't stop? When the train doors opened at Times Square, I stepped out into a blur of movement. There were people everywhere. The station itself felt like a maze, hallways filled with rushing feet, music echoing from performers, the smell of pretzels and roasted peanuts mixing with subway air. I followed the signs and pushed up through the stairs, and then I emerged, and it hit me like a wave. Times Square. It was everything I'd imagined and more. Massive billboards blinked overhead, flashing with ads for Broadway shows, streaming services, and new sneakers. Neon lights wrapped around entire buildings like electric ivy. Tourists stood in the middle of the street taking selfies, spinning in circles like kids on a carousel. Street performers danced, played guitar, posed for photos in superhero costumes. It was overwhelming. It was magic. It was terrifying. I stood in the center of it all, frozen. I could barely breathe. The noise, the light, the constant energy, it swallowed me. I felt small again, like I didn't belong. Like I had stepped into someone else's world and didn't know the rules. My heart raced. I moved to the edge of the pedestrian island and sat down on a wide concrete block next to the red steps. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my water and took small sips, trying to calm myself. And then I heard that voice again, the one I thought I'd left behind. "You're not brave enough for this place. You'll never fit in here. You're faking it. Just give up. Go home." I wanted to scream, but instead I sat in silence, letting the noise of the city drown out the noise in my head, letting it wash over me like a storm. And then slowly I reached for my journal. I opened to a blank page. My hand hovered over it. I didn't know what to write, but something inside me, some desperate, angry, wild part, told me to speak back to that voice. So I wrote, "I'm scared, but I'm here." I showed up. I'm not invisible. I'm not weak. I'm doing this. The words weren't poetic. They weren't profound, but they were mine. And writing them felt like drawing a line in the sand, like telling my fear, "I see you, but you don't get to drive anymore." After that, I closed the journal, stood up, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just moved. I walked through the thick of the crowd. I let the lights hit my face. I made eye contact with strangers. I smiled at a little girl in a pink tutu who waved at me from her dad's shoulders. I bought a $4 soft pretzel from a vendor and took a giant bite, not caring that mustard dripped down my hand. I wasn't trying to win New York. I was just trying to live it, moment by moment. Eventually, I climbed the red steps and sat down again, this time higher up. From there, I could see everything. The taxis weaving through traffic, the tourists laughing and pointing, the massive Hamilton billboard glowing gold across the street. I sat and stared for a long time. I let my breath settle. And somewhere in all that noise and color, something softened inside me. I realized something. Fear isn't something you conquer once and never face again. It's something you carry, something you learn to walk with. And on that day, in the middle of Times Square, I didn't erase my fear, but I stopped letting it paralyze me. After sitting there for almost an hour, I struck up a conversation with a woman sitting next to me. Her name was Carrie. She was from Denver, in town for a work conference. She asked if I was visiting too, and I laughed and said, "Sort of. I'm here trying to figure out who I am." She smiled, nodded, and said, "Aren't we all?" We talked for a while. About jobs, about starting over, about the weird things cities teach you about yourself. Before she left, she hugged me. It wasn't weird or forced. It was just human. And that hug stayed with me longer than I expected. Sometimes strangers remind you that you're not as alone as you think. As the sun began to set, I took one last look around the square. The lights got brighter. The crowds grew bigger. But something inside me grew too. Not louder, but steadier. I walked away from Times Square, not as someone who had defeated fear, but as someone who had faced it and kept walking. When I got back to the apartment that night, I opened my journal again and wrote, Today, I sat in the middle of everything I was afraid of. I didn't run. I didn't fake it. I felt it all and I stayed. That's what bravery looks like sometimes. I read those words out loud to myself before bed. I needed to hear them. I needed to believe them. And I did. I didn't know the last day was going to be the last. That's the funny thing about goodbyes. You think you'll feel them coming? Like a storm rolling, in with thunder and warning. But sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they creep up on you while you're ordering a coffee, or folding laundry or walking the same block. You've walked 100 times before, and then it hits you. This part of your life is ending. It was a Tuesday, just an ordinary Tuesday. I had gone for a late morning walk through Central Park, passing the Bethesda fountain, watching an elderly couple slow dance to a violinist's street performance. The air had that crisp fall bite that makes everything smell like burning leaves and promise. I had just started to feel like I belonged in the rhythm of this city. Not a visitor, not a tourist, but a local in the deepest emotional sense of the word. I knew the shortcuts, the best dollar slice place in Midtown, which subway exits to avoid during rush hour. I could jaywalk without flinching. I was starting to feel at home, but I'd also been waking up with a knot in my stomach every morning, a quiet anxiety that had settled in like fog. My savings were low, dangerously low. The freelance gigs I'd picked up weren't enough to pay rent much longer, and the job interviews I'd landed either ghosted me or politely passed. I didn't want to admit it, but the writing was on the wall. Or maybe in the bank statement. I had come to New York chasing a version of myself that felt brave and unstoppable. But dreams cost money, and I was running out of both. That night, I sat at my favorite corner cafe, a tiny spot in the East Village with chipped mugs and a radio that played nothing but 90s alt-rock, and stared into my coffee like it held the answer. The city buzzed outside the foggy window. Cabs honking, people shouting, laughter echoing from the bar across the street. I watched it all, heart heavy, knowing that I was going to have to make a decision I didn't want to make. Going home felt like failure. Leaving New York felt like giving up on myself. But staying, without a plan, without money, felt like lying to myself, like clinging to something out of pride, not purpose. That night, I walked home slower than usual. I passed the same bodegas, the same glowing streetlights, the same fire escapes that had framed so many of my new memories. I watched a group of friends sitting on a stoop, passing a slice of pizza between them, laughing like they were in no hurry to get anywhere. I wanted to freeze it. That moment, that feeling, that version of me who had taken risks, gotten lost, faced her fears, and kept showing up. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor and let the tears come. I cried for the girl who had packed her dreams into a suitcase, for the woman who found her voice in the chaos of Times Square, for the Haley who had once believed she'd never be strong enough to live a life this big. And then I cried for the girl who now had to walk away. But here's the thing, I didn't cry because I regretted it. I cried because I didn't. New York had changed me in ways I couldn't put into words. It had stripped me down and built me back up. It had scared me, thrilled me, challenged me, and held up a mirror to parts of myself I didn't even know existed. I had walked through the streets of this city carrying every version of me, shy, loud, lost, bold, and in return, the city had shown me something I never expected, that I already was enough. Even if I had to leave. I spent my final few days soaking in every piece of the city I could. I took one last stroll through the Met, staring too long at paintings I didn't fully understand. I sat on the High Line during golden hour, letting the sunset wrap around me like a soft goodbye. I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge one more time, this time slower, more present, watching the skyline shimmer as the lights flicked on building by building. And on my last night, I stood in the middle of Times Square again, just like I had weeks before. The same noise, the same crowd, but a different me. This time I didn't sit down or panic or freeze. This time I stood there tall. I whispered to myself, "You did it, Haley. You lived it. You were brave." The morning I left, I packed in silence. My suitcase wasn't just full of clothes, it was full of stories. The scarf I bought from a street vendor during a rainstorm. The sketchbook I'd filled with half-written thoughts and coffee stains. A Metro card with just enough left for one last swipe. I folded everything with care, not just to make it fit, but because I was carrying something sacred. My cab driver didn't say much during the ride to the airport. I stared out the window, watching the skyline get smaller. The buildings turn to bridges, then trees. I felt a strange peace settle in, like I wasn't leaving something behind, but taking it with me. Because New York doesn't stay in one place. New York lives in you. It lives in the way you walk, faster now with purpose. It lives in how you speak, bolder, unafraid to say what you really mean. It lives in your spine, your stride, your laugh that comes a little easier when you remember who you became there. Back in Wisconsin, the air felt quieter. The skies seemed wider. People moved slower. But I didn't come back the same. I came back with city dust on my shoes and fire in my belly. I came back with memories stitched into my skin. Late night slices, unexpected friendships, subway breakdowns, and stargazing from rooftops. I came back with a heart that had stretched wider than I ever thought it could. People asked me, how was New York? And I always smiled, because how do you explain a city that becomes part of your DNA? I told them it was loud and wild and beautiful and hard. I told them I loved it so much it broke me open. I told them it was everything I didn't know I needed. And sometimes late at night I still hear it. The honking horns, the subway announcements, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement. And I know I'll go back. Not because I didn't finish something, but because New York gave me a new beginning. It reminded me that I could be afraid and still move forward. That getting lost doesn't mean you're broken. That the version of you you've been waiting to become, she's already inside you. And maybe the most powerful thing New York taught me is this. You don't have to stay somewhere forever for it to change your life. Sometimes the places we leave behind are the ones that live in us the loudest. I left New York, but it never left me.